I'm Sue Detweiler, your host, and my goal is to help you live with more passion, love with more purpose, and lead an overcoming life. Today, we are talking about relationships that heal. And I am interviewing author John Paul DeGance, founder and president of Communio. His new book is called Endgame: The Church's Strategic Move to Save Faith and Family in America. I really believe that marriage is one of the most urgent ministry gaps for the church today. And when there's a family decline in our culture, it also drives a faith decline. Did you know that 40% of all births in the United States occur outside of marriage? And that 54% of children born in the US reach their 17th birthday without a married mom and dad in the home. And 72% of all churches lack marriage ministry. These statistics come from J.P. DeGance and this book. And I want you to ask yourself this question: is my marriage, if you are married, am I walking in the healthiest relationship with my spouse that I've ever walked in? And if not, if you feel like you need a refresher, maybe you're in a conflict in your own relationship, maybe you've just began your marriage relationship and you want to grow deeper and strengthen your own marriage, well, I encourage you to consider signing up for the course led by my husband Wayne and myself called How to Build a Marriage That Lasts. And you can sign up for that on SueDetweiler.com. Well, today on Healing Rain, I have JP, John Paul DeGance, with me, and he has a brand new book out. So welcome on Healing Rain, JP.
Hey, thank you so much, Sue. Excellent to be with you.
So can you hold up your book? I mean, the title of
Yeah,
this book, and read the title for those that
yeah,
are
it's
listening.
it's uh, it's Endgame, the Church's strategic move to save faith and family in America. And my co-author, John Van App, and I wrote this really for Christian leaders, church leaders, with the idea of mobilizing the church, that the church can actually spark a national renaissance in marriage, and is really the only institution that can do it because of the power of the gospel and the power of our Savior Jesus Christ. The church can produce a great renewal through marriage. In fact, it's both a great opportunity for the church, and it's the church's responsibility to do it, and that
Mm-hmm.
that in so many ways the future of Christianity is so closely tied to the health and vitality of our marriages.
Well, I think you're preaching to the choir. My husband and I have been married, way too long, married and in ministry for over 37 years. And really, from the beginning of our marriage and ministry, we have been about helping marriages. And we've rolled up our sleeves. Most recently, when we were serving as senior pastors, we reached out. There's something called Together in Texas, where
Yeah,
people go and they look for training to get married. And we made it one of the outreaches of our church. So we would do marriage seminars every month.
yeah,
And we saw it as an outreach, and we saw so many couples make commitments to Jesus Christ in the
yeah.
midst of that seminar. Their openness to the gospel was incredible. And so we've personally seen the transformative power of God working through marriages. So I really salute the large scale impact that you're pointing to in the end game. And can you talk about like where did you get this passion from? Because this just
Yeah.
doesn't happen overnight. So what's the
No, thank
history
you.
for you?
Yeah. Yeah, for me, like a lot of people, I came to Washington, D.C. originally to try to save the country by focusing on politics. And it became God providentially started really tapping on my head and getting me to redirect my life. It was almost 14 years ago now. My sister's family failed. And she was in a very abusive marriage. And she had actually become homeless and asked my wife and I to take in her four kids. They were 10, 11, 14, and 15. And
Wow.
my wife and I had three kids of our own, three and under. And we experienced firsthand what happens in a home to a child when you lose a married mom and a dad, and just saw that play out. And my wife and I just started asking the question of God, what more could we do? And a lot of my professional life in the political world, I saw a lot of tools and technologies that really could be sanctified and brought into the service of the church, and ended up becoming the executive vice president of a place called the Philanthropy Roundtable, and started a
Mm.
philanthropic experiment there that that worked with churches. We worked with more than 50 churches in Jacksonville, Florida, and moved nearly 60,000 people through 4 hour longer relationship education in the county within 3 years. We saturated that county with digital outreach and advertising, drawing people into churches. So the church was the star, the church was the hero. That's ultimately where people encounter relationship best, right? And uh, and the net was the divorce rate dropped 24%. And
Wow.
we had scholars from the University of Virginia and Brad Wilcox and scholars from Florida State conclude there was no other explanation for that decline other than our intervention in the county. And that got us going. We said, okay, we want to create a unit scale model, meaning let's go church by church and let's equip churches with what we now call a data informed approach to a full circle relationship ministry. And that means our message is that a great marriage begins decades before the wedding day. So for single life, for those who are single again, for those who are single parents, how do we support them toward healthy relationships? And then those who are engaged, married, and those who are in crisis, and help a church think strategically through each of those different dimensions.
Oh, I really, really appreciate the work of this. And I also honor it. You know, when I do test about my gifts, strategic for me is always one of those gifts. And I do believe that we need to think much more strategically about the impact of marriage and family towards our larger culture, towards life. And the fact that you did the work to even quantify the study, so I've got some background in psychology, and I know the difficulty of doing that type of study. And yet what you're doing is you're creating a context even in the world to talk about, hey, intervention in marriages changes culture, and you've got the
Yes.
numbers to really point to, which is incredible.
Yes. Yeah. And when you look at it, one of the things when we talk to a pastor is that when you compare a baby boomer to a millennial, Sue,
Yeah.
everyone knows that the millennial goes to church a lot less frequently than the baby boomer. But what
Mhm.
usually surprises a pastor is that the baby boomer goes to church every week at the exact same rate, almost the exact same rate as a millennial.
Mhm.
If I know one thing about both people, if they both grew up in a home with continuously married parents, there's almost no difference in how frequently a millennial or a Gen Zer goes to church when compared to a baby boomer. What that means is pastors, if we can heal marriage, if we can renew marriage, we will renew faith again. Our churches would be full if the families of origin, the family structures of our people looked like past generations. And the church can bring about this renaissance. The culture is telling us, obviously, the message of the culture about sex and marriage is has taken over, and the church has a countercultural message to it. And it just so happens also that the social science and the psychological sciences are proving that the gospel's true, that the message of healthy marriages, godly marriages, Christ-centered marriages, also happens to produce the greatest levels of human flourishing and thriving than any other human institution.
Yeah. And I think there's such a strategic attack from the enemy
Yes,
against marriage and even against human sexuality,
that's right.
even against male and female and
Yes.
marriage being between a husband and a wife. I mean, it literally blows my mind, just the level of warfare around these issues in our nation right now.
It shouldn't surprise us, right, that God started his entire story with us in the garden with the marriage. He ends it in Revelation with the wedding feast of the Lamb. He has revealed his salvation to us as a spousal love story, right? Psalms of
Yeah.
Solomon, the prophet Hosea, and we see it in Paul,
Hmm.
in Ephesians and Corinthians, among others,
Hmm.
right? It's throughout the scriptures. And so the evil one knows that if he can destroy the marital embrace, then once you break down the human analog and you try to communicate to folks that there's a Father in heaven who loves us, and uh, Christ so loves the church that it's the bridegroom's love for the bride. If that's gone in my own mind, it's hard for me to grasp it, and that's what we're seeing in the psychology and the social science, that faith becomes stinted. These become this becomes the rocky soil where seed is thrown. It's really hard for it to take root. So when we work with a church, individual church, we help them understand that you can grow considerably. It shouldn't Marriage ministry and relationship ministry actually is the great need of our time, and it can be, just as you said,
Hmm.
with Together in Texas. It is a great opportunity to do outreach. So we have also developed not only a deep knowledge of marriage ministry resources, okay, but then we also provide churches with evangelization and marketing tools. We customize everything from Facebook campaigns, Instagram, email prospecting, texting, direct mail, block walking mobile apps that help a church go to exactly the households. We can help a church find, for instance, and do marketing to couples who are struggling in their marriage, to single people who look like they're likely to get married soon. We can help a church find people who are pregnant and married, and pregnant and unmarried, with starting families, right? As you and your husband know, in running a church, that there's a few different times where people come back to back to faith, hatch, matched, and dispatch, right? And people, when the new baby's born, okay, we want to help the church think strategically there and draw people in. And when people match up
Oh,
as couples, and
yeah.
so the church can provide.
Uh-huh.
We know in the third world, we go out and we serve into needs. So if there's
Hmm.
thirst, we build a well. If there's hunger, we bring food. Okay, but in the first world, in this country, in the U.S., people are dying of thirst in their relationships, and that's what the church can build, can be the well for relationship
Hmm.
health.
Oh, I really believe it. And I really appreciate your heart to really help all types of Christian churches. You're ecumenical in your approach. And I appreciate that because we have a beautiful body of Christ. And being able to travel, I travel more than I'm home right now. And just knowing, but I couldn't do that when I was raising my children. They're now all
Sure.
grown
So
and
that does
having
happen one
grandchildren.
day. You promise.
It
One day my kids
does.
season.
Well, and I'll tell you, JP, it's one of the greatest joys. It's one of the greatest joys when your child finds a godly spouse, when they get married, and then when they are raising grandchildren, children. I have 7 grandchildren now, and they are wonderful parents. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just such a joy when your children walk in truth, and I see them too. I mean, the struggles that we went through, in many ways, they stand on our shoulders. I feel like my daughters are better moms than I was, you know? And that is how God's created this to be. There's a multiplication of blessing on family, and part of that multiplication is our children stand on our shoulders and they raise a godly generation.
Yeah, amen to that. That is my prayer, my wife's prayer is that our children will be both holier men and women and better parents than we are as we seek to bless them and
Hmm.
see God bless them in their relationships.
Hmm.
So, and um, this is how the world was so attracted. I write in the book about the early church's experience in conversion, that the difference between our marriages and our families and the pagan world's marriages and families were so significant that
Hmm.
the pagans wanted in. They wanted what we had, the love that we had, the spouses that we had, and it was our marriages that significantly led to the conversion of the ancient world. And it
Oh,
can happen
that's
again.
huge.
That can be the conversion of our now neo-pagan world. That in so many ways we're so post-Christian in many places that we've become pre-Christian again. And why not spread the gospel that this way yet again?
Hmm. And that's great. One other thing that you mentioned, which we are now, we passed on our church, so we are now a part of Upper Room. And part of why we're there is this is a congregation that's reaching 20 somethings. They are getting saved. And I have so much respect for the person, the pastor that pastors marriage and relationships. And really all of the classes that we do are not just geared towards those that are married.
Yeah,
Many of them are geared towards relationships in general
yeah,
and helping the 20 somethings who are working through all sorts of trauma
mhm,
become emotionally healthy, and prepare their hearts to be a great spouse. And I
exactly.
love how we're going back and we're going farther back. And it sounded like that's something that you have a passion for too. Um,
Yes.
so talk a
Yeah,
little bit
yeah,
about that.
yeah. What we've found both um, in our work at Communio and what ultimately gave birth to the book is uh, we in the church, we see the rise in cohabitation, right? So
Oh,
70%
yes.
of all marriages are preceded with some level of long-term cohabitation. That a lot of times the cause and the emotional driver of that is the experiencing of past childhood trauma, and so a lot of times
Hmm.
adults don't they want to avoid the hardship that they've experienced in their own home lives, and they think that cohabitation is this great way to avoid it. But obviously, we know that's not the case. That actually,
Hmm.
um, cohabitation leads to higher incidence of divorce. Not only if that couple who cohabitates gets married, but a lot of people don't know that if a person cohabitates and then later finds somebody else that they marry, that that marriage is as frequently as unstable as second marriages or third marriages, depending on how many times they cohabitated. So there's all sorts of women are the most vulnerable women for domestic violence is a woman who lives with her boyfriend. A child who is conceived in a home, in a cohabiting home, we know is the numbers are 40% are without a dad by the age of 5 and 70% by the age of 12. And anyone would tell you that a child who is raised in a home with a man who's not his dad is very vulnerable to abuse and violence, the most vulnerable, actually. So all of that speaks to a deep need for us to educate the church about these risk areas, and then equip our young people today, because the world is filling their head and the ideas that are deeply unhealthy and anti-science, actually, and against the gospel. That and so one of the reasons I partnered with John Van App is because John, who's a good friend, sees this as well, and he's helped develop some resources for singles to help them discern and enter into relationships in a healthy
Mhm.
way. That is so badly needed. So the number of people getting married every year has dropped 31% just since the year 2000. It's dropped 61% since the year
Mhm.
1970. So we can
Mhm.
no longer think of marriage ministry. We have to think of it in the way that you guys are approaching it in the upper room. That
Mhm.
it actually, we need to engage our single young adults. We need to help
Mhm.
folks form and understand the right cadence for relationship
Mhm.
health and help them live a countercultural life in that way.
Yeah. Well, and be able to address today's topics. I mean, it one of the reasons why people will cohabitate is that they don't want divorce. And yet the truth is that when people have lived together for any significant amount of time, it may not be a legal divorce, but it has the same repercussions on their life and their emotions and their feelings as a divorce. And
Right.
so they're not avoiding a divorce, they're creating a more likely chance of separation.
That's right. That's exactly right. No, and uh, in terms of what we know within the rise of depression, antidepressants, suicidal ideation, okay, more sexual partners an individual has over time, the more those challenges go up, right? More depression, more suicidal ideation, particularly in women. And so we're hardwired for monogamy. That's how God made us. Okay. And so
Mhm.
that monogamy needs to be honored. Whether or not if we don't honor it, what we start to see is an increase in all of these challenges that our young people are experiencing. And the church, we need to be relevant to those, and both relevant and speaking um, to the needs right now.
Well, thank you so much for the journey that you're on, JP. Thank you for even being a part of the healing journey, even of your sister, and, rolling up your sleeves and making a difference in her kid's life. This ministry is not for the cowards. It's really being willing to get into church life, but get into life itself and deal with messy things. Um,
Right.
so
Well,
thank you for
well,
that.
thank you. Anybody who's in the audience, I'd encourage you to talk to your pastor about making your church really can our church become a hub for relationship health and marital health. If you go to
Hmm.
communio.org, we have a bunch of resources to support the church in doing that. And then you can also pick up, anyone in the audience can pick up Endgame, and you can go to endgamebook.org to pick up a copy, or of course get it from Amazon, but endgamebook.org. So,
Okay, that's great. And who published that? Who's the publisher?
oh, it's Trinity Press
Trinity
is
Press has
Trinity.
published it. Okay, well, I think that's a really great word, and we'll include that in the end notes as well, the show notes. But to be able to get this resource, and really, if you're a pastor, because I know there's quite a few pastors that watch this or listen to this, I want to encourage you to take this to the Lord in prayer and ask the Lord how, because it's not if really, because if you're a pastor, you're pastoring marriages. That's just part of what you're doing. So, really inquire of the Lord how you are to minister to marriages, really, um, not only in the next decade, but set your sights on making a difference in a generation.
That's right. Well, thank you so much, Sue. God bless you.
Thank you. Bless you. Well, as we close today, I really encourage you to seek out help. If you are a pastor or leader, consider making your church a hub church and reach out to JP DeGance and his ministry, Communio. Now, if you are a husband or a wife and you desire to build your personal marriage relationship, that it could be the best ever, I encourage you to consider signing up for a marriage course that Wayne and I lead online, and you are able to sign up for it at SueDetweiler.com. It's called How to Build a Marriage That Lasts. And regardless, can we agree together that marriage and healthy marriages make a difference in our culture? And I'm going to be praying that you're going to be a difference maker. And I'm thankful that relationships heal.